All right, folks, welcome back. It's finally time. I feel like I'm being put on a chopping block here. This is the moment we've been waiting for. I had this video in mind when I started listening to their full discography like a month and a half ago with the lead up to their new album, and we're finally here to finally categorize the full Architects discography and rank them from 11 to 1, and I'm terrified. Look, let me preface this whole video by saying that Architects have a extremely stellar and consistent discography across the board, but there are some duds in there and there are some absolutely S-tier albums that we will go through. Now, of course, I'm not going to be able to please everyone with this kind of a video. I've done many of these styles of videos before, and there's always some yappy little donut in the comment. Shut up! I'm getting that out there before I even post this video because I know you're going to be very annoying. I can see you. Opinions exist for a reason. Have your opinion. Don't be a about it, all right? All right, so starting us off at a number 11 on the list, kind of an irrelevant number. I'm not going to like spend too much time on the albums that are really far down my list unless I think the general consensus will be that I'm massively wrong and I have to explain myself. But I think this is a fair album to have at number 11. It is Nightmares, their first ever album, their 2006 release, which is the only album in the band's discography that doesn't feature Sam Carter on it. So honestly, as far as I'm concerned, it doesn't feel like an Architects album to me. I got into the band around 2021 when For Those That Wish to Exist came out, and that's just kind of like the sound that I grew to know. And then I went back in the discography into that like middle goated portion of the discography, really got to love the band. So going back in time and listening to Nightmares, stylistically and compositionally, it was very like mathy. So I was like, this is definitely not like Architects at all today. So yeah, for that reason, it goes at the number 11 spot. It's Architects' Nightmares. Fast forwarding 6 years, we have their 2012 album coming in at number 10. The reasoning behind this, I don't have any any intricate reasoning. It's just if I look at the other albums in the discography, I can't do anything because some of the albums are just so stellar that they have to be up the list. And the Here and Now didn't really do much for me. Sam is like trying the whole singing thing in this album, and stylistically, I think it's a little bit more punk if I remember correctly. I only listened to this like last week, but it's very forgettable. I just am into it. Stylistically, not for me at all. So at my number 10 spot, it's the Here and Now. Number 9 on the list, we are going to 2007. So we're going back in time a little bit from the Here and Now to Architects' second ever album and the first album that Sam Carter ever featured. And honestly, as an Architects fan, and like I said, someone who got into the band more recently, might as well have not been Sam. Sounds nothing like Sam. It's a little bit more like up my street in terms of the overall stylistic approach, opposed to their album prior, which was their first album, which we've already put in the number 11 spot. So this is a bit of a jump up. It's number 9 on the list, but it's honestly just a bit of a technicality. I don't really see myself returning to any of these albums, but there's obviously some lore behind it. It's the first ever Architects album with Sam on it. And also there's a track on this called North Lane, which is obviously the band North Lane was inspired by this track and actually started from there. And North Lane went on to be one of my favorite bands. So for that reason, it goes to the number 9 spot, but honestly, don't see myself returning to this album anytime soon. Alright lads, this is where shit gets a little bit controversial and I'm going to start catching some heat. I may have already caught some virtual hands, I don't know, but we'll see. Coming in at number 8 on my list, we are jumping forward a significant jump in their discography to 2022 to their, honestly, oh man, it's kind of their worst album, but because it has some like catchy songs in it that I do enjoy, I have to put it here because I would more likely go back to this album than I would to the other albums, but that's just purely because stylistically it's closer to the sound that I like Architects for. You know, it's a bit of a weird contradiction there because I think it's probably their worst fucking album, but if I'm listing it in terms of how much I actually enjoy it and how much I would rather go back to, I gotta put the Classic Symptoms of a Broken Spirit at my number 8 spot. Anyways, moving on to number 7, and this is definitely where things just get hard because Architects have, at least, depending on who you ask, 7 or 8 really good albums. So, you know, it's a tough one. There has to be a number 1 spot. There has to be a number 2 spot. there has to be a number 3. So like I said at the start of the video, this was something that's been hanging over me. I've been like every morning walking to get a coffee, putting the headphones on and like listening back to certain albums and going through the different tracks and seeing which tracks I prefer. And it's very, very hard. But there has to be a number 7 spot, lads. And people are not going to be happy with this one. But there's definitely an element of nostalgia that is tied to this album. It is a great album that I think came out in 2013. It did. It is 58 minutes long. So I remember it being quite long. Now this is I did hear the deluxe version. But it is, of course, Daybreaker. Now for me, Daybreaker was like a return to form after the Here and Now, because they had not Broken Cross, they had Hollow Crown, which was sick, very riffy, very like metalcore and more in line with the albums that came later in their discography. But then they went to the Here and Now, which kind of like turned me off completely, and then back to Daybreaker. But it just, the main criticism and the like main takeaway I had from listening to that album was that Sam really hadn't found his singing voice yet, and they do try and do a lot of the like big like arena style choruses, not even arena style choruses like they do today, but like Sam is definitely leaning into his like singing bag a lot more, and he's just not there as a vocalist in my opinion. Now don't get me wrong, today's day and age, brother, Sam is incredible. We've seen it across all the last few albums. He's got a great voice, but this album just didn't really click with me. Don't get me wrong, there's some sick tracks in there and there's like an amazing like compilation of riffs throughout the album, but just Sam's voice isn't delivering the message in a lot of the songs for me. So for that reason, it goes at number 7. It is Daybreaker. All right, and now I'm pretty confident that I'm going to start hurting some feelings here, so lock in, lads. My number 6 album from Architects is their 2009 release, which you guys will already know. If you are an Architects super fan, you'll know what year the albums came out. But don't get me wrong, this album is like, from what I've heard from a lot of people and what I had been hearing in the lead up to doing their whole discography, was that this album is like the first album that really like set them apart in the scene. Or I guess like kind of gave them a bit of a name. They didn't really have a sound up until Hollow Crown, and then people started to fuck with the band, and then obviously the following album was The Here and Now, which was a bit of a jarring shift. Then they went back to the Hollow Crown sound a little bit more, and like more riffy and metalcore. But again, it's great. I just think it's not as good as the albums that are going to come after this. There's obviously elements of nostalgia that are tied to this album as well. There is some big tracks in there. From my listening, I liked 3 songs of the 12, with Early Grave, Numbers Count for Nothing, and Follow the Water. Follow the Water is an incredible Architects track. Don't get me wrong, I absolutely love that. I think it has Ollie Sykes on it as well, which I didn't notice at the time, but like on further listening, it's sick. Not just because of the feature, but like just the riff on that fucking album. It had me doing the worm and all this kind of shit. It was crazy. Just again, this album is victim of the albums that follow after this point on my list, because the other albums, in my opinion, are just more listenable and better. So at number 6 is 2009 Hollow Crown. And the top 5, we are arriving here, and honestly, man, I don't even know. It could be a toss-up, but I'm pretty confident on top 5. Or at least on the number 5 slot. I don't know anything beyond this, but my number 5 slot goes to the album that was released in 2021 and was the album that got me into Architects in the first place. The first Architects track I ever heard was Animals, which I know is just such a basic way to get into Architects, but you know, I'm only in the metal scene in the last like 5-6 years, so give me a break, all right? But that's why we wanted to catch up and do all the discography and check it out and go back to the years and reel in the years and see the history of the band, and a band that like shaped metalcore so much. So my number 5 slot is For Those That Wish to Exist. I just love some of the songs on that. I don't think it holds a candle to a lot of the other albums that I have beyond this, but if I'm looking at it, there's obviously elements of nostalgia tied to it, because again, it's the first experience I had with Architects, but I still stand by it. As a full album, it doesn't live up to some of the singles. It's a solid album, but it just doesn't go higher for me because it just kind of feels a little bit hollow in parts. It's a little bit boring after a while. There is some great like orchestral elements and stuff, and I loved how they do all that stuff, but the singles for me were just so strong. I loved Black Lungs, I loved Animals, Dead Butterflies, all these tracks that just have like so much emotion in it. They're sick. So my number 5 slot is For Those That Wish to Exist. Number 4, lads, and this is where things get a little bit confusing, because obviously they had a new album that dropped last week. there is recency bias there. But when I stack it up against all of the other albums, again, the first portion of the discography, like the first like 4 or 5 albums, they are great, but they're never really gonna stack up against some of the modern stuff, because again, I do love modern metal music and I love modern production, and don't get me wrong, there is some like OG albums that I absolutely adore and I've really grown to love over time, but for the most part, albums that are released in the modern age in the last like 5-6 years that I've gotten into are a little bit more aligned with my taste when it comes to like that modern metal production. So their latest album, the one that came out last week, The Sky, the Earth and All Between, is my number 4. For me, The Sky, the Earth and All Between just does what they tried to do on For Those That Wish to Exist and The Classic Symptoms a lot better than they had previously. It feels like the culmination of that attempt to like go towards the sound that they've like ended up at in this album, and I think they've kind of like perfected it to a certain degree, but I still have that like thing in my brain that like tells me that Architects is not this type of band, so it never really sits right with me, because we'll get onto it, because the next albums that follow are kind of where I see the core and the heart of Architects being at, and I think a lot of people agree with me on that one. But in terms of just the overall appeal to like return to it, some of the singles have been amazing, and some of the album tracks were fantastic as well. Obviously I did my album review and reaction, which is on YouTube and Patreon. You can get that, so you'll see all of my thoughts in more detail if that's what you're looking for, like really detailed analysis and like really diving into each track. All of that will be on Patreon and on my YouTube channel, so go and check that out. But this is more just to show you guys where I actually put them right now. Of course, all this can change as well over time, but right now their new album, The Sky, the Earth and All Between, is my number 4. Number 3 is a jump backwards from the last album back to 2014 with Lost Forever, Lost Together, which is an album full of absolute heaters. Again, really hard to like not discuss particular songs because this will all be relevant in a future video. But Lost Forever, Lost Together is my number 3. And again, any other band's discography, this would be number 1 because it's such a good album. But I just had to pick between 3 goated albums, and this one was the one that I feel as though has the least consistency, which is saying a lot because of how consistent this album is, and some of the tracks on this fucking thing are stupid. Number 2, and this is like genuinely what I've been wrestling with over the last couple of days since the new album came out. I kind of like listened to the new album, dissected all that, and I was like, okay, well, this album's probably a little bit better than For Those That Wish to Exist. It's not a top tier album from Architects, so I mean, it kind of falls into here, but like the thing I had in the back of my mind was, okay, the real battle is coming up. Forget about the new album. The new album was never going to be S tier compared to these albums. The real battle I have to deal with over the next couple of days is deciding between the 2 albums that are left, which is Holy Hell and All Our Gods Have Abandoned Us, and Lost Forever, Lost Together. Don't get me wrong, that album is also incredible, but this one was really, really tough. So I'll give you some insight, because obviously when I give you away what number 2 is, the number 1 will become obvious because it's the only one left. All Our Gods Have Abandoned Us is an album that has such oh man, Burb did a video on this and he explained it pretty well in his like Architects discography review and his like tier listing of the albums. I don't even like, I feel like just go back and watch my reaction to All Our Gods Have Abandoned Us. And again, I'm not someone who has any emotional ties to Tom Searle. I wasn't listening to the band when Tom Searle was still alive, so I don't have that like familiarity and that like, you know, connection to him because, you know, I'm following his Instagram or I'm following all of his stuff and I'm following him as an artist over years and like really delving into his lyrics and stuff. I got into this band like, you know, I started listening to these albums like 2-3 years ago, and I just felt such a strong emotional connection to the All Our Gods Have Abandoned Us album. So that's my thoughts on the All Our Gods Have Abandoned Us album. It's like such a brilliantly crafted album that has so much nuance and emotion tied to it that it's a beautiful thing. It's so heartbreaking. It's so heavy. It's so meaningful. It just ticks so many boxes for like a memorable album. And then Holy Hell on the other hand has just got some absolutely disgustingly good songs, so many catchy moments, has all that like ethereal atmosphere that we got in All Our Gods Have Abandoned Us, but also brings in a lot more riffs in my opinion and maybe a little bit more melody. So I think song wise and track by track, I think Holy Hell for me has more consistent tracks and would maybe be a little bit more listenable on return winning. I probably have listened to Holy Hell more than All Our Gods Have Abandoned Us, but I did have to pick between two. As far as I'm concerned, the top three albums are all kind of tied. It's just like everyone refers to that like trilogy as just that moment of Architect's career, and I agree, but I had to pick, for the sake of a video, I had to pick one. So my number 2 spot is Architect's 2018 album, which is of course Holy Hell. Which of course leaves us with our number 1, which it can only be one thing. And again, like I've already alluded to, this was such a hard pick, lads. It really came down to, right, what am I judging here? I'm judging albums. And thematically, All Our Gods Have Abandoned Us just does something to like really bring out the emotion. I listened to Gone with the Wind again this morning and I was literally tearing up on my way to like go get a coffee, just like at 9 a.m, just walking, just like, and again, I have no ties to this. And I think when I look at some of the live performances and I see Sam performing, like, geez, I'm getting like emotional even talking about it now, but seeing Sam perform the live performance, I think it was at Alexander Palace, I'm not sure, Ali Pali, I'm pretty sure it was, when they performed Gone with the Wind live, and like Sam like breaks down. I think that was kind of, anytime I was thinking about how to choose between these two albums, I thought of that performance and I was like, there's just so much meaning in that, man. Now obviously Holy Hell has a lot of meaning as well. That album is coming from the perspective of someone who's like already passed away, and it just, that has a lot of impact. So again, number 1 is number 1 and is well deserved because it just feels like a more memorable album thematically. It feels so dark and heavy. There's some amazing songs in there, some hard-hitting moments. I think riff-wise and just like song like appeal in terms of like track by track and like songs that I would take out of context and listen to, Holy Hell for me has more consistent bangers, we'll call them. But All Our Gods Have Abandoned Us, if we're rating albums, which is what we're doing here, All Our Gods Have Abandoned Us feels like a magnum opus. It feels like a masterpiece. It feels like something very memorable thematically, and also the songs are all so good and the theme of the album is so consistent. So number 1 for me is Architect's 2016 album, All Our Gods Have Abandoned Us. Alright, this is Future Drew coming in here, and I've actually been filming my top singles. I've been filming my video for top singles, like the best Architect singles, and I've been listening to all the singles and like trying to figure out which, it's the hardest thing in the world. And I just delved into the All Our Gods Have Abandoned Us world, and I already have my like final thoughts wrapped up in the album video, but I just figured I don't think I've done the album enough justice with my thoughts. And one thing I wanted to leave it on with my reasoning behind why All Our Gods Have Abandoned Us is number 1 is it is just one of those albums that makes you remember, and makes me remember specifically. Obviously this is all just my thoughts, but I'd imagine this is why a lot of people love this album as well, is it really cements home and reminds people why we love music, and why, you know, I wake up every day and I'm excited to find the next band, and I'm excited to listen to the next album. And this is always why, like, criticisms or, you know, moments of maybe not agreeing with the band and the direction they're going, and, you know, maybe certain songs or directions that they start to go in, that's, you know, sometimes it's easy to get lost in all of the smoke and, you know, kind of feel like you're becoming a hater. But when you're really deep and you go back to the emotions that albums like All Our Gods Have Abandoned Us have made you feel in the past, it's that emotional connection, man. It's like, I just had a teary moment there listening to or watching the video for Gone with the Wind, and, you know, the emotional connection behind it and the beauty of it, the live performance aspect and the crowd there getting behind the band. It's just a stark reminder for me as to why that album is so amazing, and what I do this for, man. You know, there's very few moments, and like, you know, life goes so quickly and there's so much shit happening all the time and it's going so fast, like next upload, and kind of sometimes you just forget. Like, I'm grateful every single fucking day. It's such a unique opportunity, and it's albums like this that really, you know, cement it home for me. So I think I needed to have that like emotional connection again with the album before actually talking about it, because it is just such a masterpiece. It is such a beautiful piece of work. And that is something that Holy Hell, again, I think Holy Hell has amazing songs and it's almost a tie, but I think because of that emotional connection, like the opener to the album does the same thing to me as well, Nihilist. It's a little bit more cathartic and a little bit more like, you know, rougher around the edges and a little bit more to the point with, you know, the nihilistic approach. It's literally called Nihilist. But Gone with the Wind, obviously, with the passing of Tom Searle, and what it means is just so artistically beautiful and just does so much to me, man. And yeah, I wanted to come back on and just, I don't know how I'm going to put this video together now because I've already done my outro, but I guess maybe I'll just like shoehorn this in somewhere just to show the emotional connection that it's had. Like I just watched that whole video again and listened to some of the songs and I'm welling up here, and it just reminds me of why we do this and why that album is so special. So yeah, now it's all from me, lads. I really appreciate you guys watching. See you in the next one. Cheers.